Psalm 129 and continue our Bible lesson. Psalm 129 and the first 8 verses, or rather all 8 verses. Many a time have they afflicted me from my youth, may Israel now say. Many a time have they afflicted me from my youth, yet they have not prevailed against me. The plowers plowed upon my back, they made long their furrows. The Lord is righteous, he hath cut asunder the cords of the wicked. Let them all be confounded and turned back that hate Zion. Let them be as the grass upon the housetops, which withereth afore it groweth up. Wherewith the mower filleth not his hand, nor he that bindeth sheaves his bosom. Neither do they which go by say, The blessing of the Lord be upon you. We bless you in the name of the Lord. Verse 1 says, Many a time have they afflicted me from my youth, may Israel now say. Colon, and the sentence continues, verse 2. Many a time have they afflicted me from my youth, yet they have not prevailed against me. And the singular pronoun, me, at the end of verse 2, just before verse 3, the plowers plowed upon my back, they made long their furrows, sounds like the context should be the crucifixion of the Lord Jesus Christ. And so some commentators, they don't know what to do with the word Israel found there in verse 1. Why is that mentioned at the start of this psalm? We're trying to keep this answer as simple as we can as Bible believers. Run, if you will, back to the book of Leviticus 26. Leviticus 26. And Leviticus 26, verse 44. And yet for all that, when they be in the land of their enemies, I will not cast them away, neither will I abhor them, to destroy them utterly, and to break my covenant with them, for I am the Lord their God. And also at the end of the Old Testament, Malachi chapter 3. And this is a great verse to commit to memory, because it'll come up in conversation someday when you're least expecting it. You can pull it out of your hat and impress somebody by your familiarity with the prophets. Malachi 3, notice there what God says in verse 6. For I am the Lord, I change not. Therefore, ye sons of Jacob are not consumed. It's God who has kept the Jew alive and has preserved the race of the Jew. The nation of Israel has every right to thank God for his protection, his deliverance of them as a people. And the fact is that this psalm applies both to Israel and to Jesus Christ. Notice how Israel is first mentioned as one unit. Go back to Exodus chapter 4. Exodus 4. Exodus 4, notice there, we'll read verses 21 and 22. The Lord said unto Moses, When thou goest to return into Egypt, see that thou do all those wonders before Pharaoh which I have put in thine hand. But I will harden his heart that he shall not let the people go. And thou shalt say unto Pharaoh, Thus saith the Lord, Israel is my son, even my firstborn. Israel, or the Jews, or the sons of Jacob, and so forth, are also pictured as God's suffering servant throughout the Scriptures. Let me have you go, and we'll look at a few references, all in the book of Isaiah. Isaiah 37, let's go there first. Isaiah 37. And verse 35. For I will defend this city to save it for mine own sake and for my servant David's sake. There God providing protection from the Assyrian army and on the city of Jerusalem because of David. David is called God's servant. Look at Isaiah 41. Isaiah 41 and verse 8. But thou, Israel, art my servant, Jacob whom I have chosen, the seed of Abraham, my friend Israel, is called God's servant. Isaiah 42, verse 1. Behold my servant whom I uphold, mine elect, in whom my soul delighteth. I have put my spirit upon him. He shall bring forth judgment to the Gentiles. There, Jesus Christ, in prophetic type, is pictured as God's servant. Isaiah 43 and verse 10. Isaiah 43, verse 10. Ye are my witnesses, saith the Lord, and my servant, whom I have chosen, that ye may know and believe me, and understand that I am he. Before me there was no God formed, neither shall there be after me. Again, Jesus Christ is the servant there. Verse 40, or chapter 44 rather, and verse 21. Remember these, O Jacob and Israel, thou art my servant. I have formed thee, thou art my servant, O Israel, thou shalt not be forgotten of me. There, Jacob or Israel again is the, or did I miss that? Might have fat finger today. And look also at Isaiah 44, verse 1. Yet now hear, O Jacob, my servant, and Israel, whom I have chosen. There again, Israel is God's servant. And Isaiah 48, and verse 20. Go ye forth of Babylon, flee ye from the Chaldeans, with a voice of singing declare ye, tell this, utter it even to the end of the earth, say ye, the Lord hath redeemed his servant Jacob. Once again, Jacob or Israel is called the servant of God. And Isaiah 49, verse 5. And now saith the Lord that formed me from the womb to be his servant, to bring Jacob again to him. Though Israel be not gathered, yet shall I be glorious in the eyes of the Lord, and my God shall be my strength. There again, Christ is anticipated as God's servant. So in 2017, if an Orthodox Jew insists that the suffering servant, Isaiah 53, he was wounded for our transgressions and bruised for our iniquities and so forth, refers to the collective nation of Israel, he's only half right. He's only half right. But only half. See, without the other half of the application, he misses his Messiah yet again. The sad reality indeed. But it's not strictly one or the other. So back to our text, Psalm 129, verse 3, the plowers plowed upon my back, they made long their furrows. That's going to be a messianic prophecy as well. And verse 1 finishes, may Israel now say, but not right now. Not right now. Verses 1, 2, 3, and 4 is the millennium as far as Israel is concerned, and their sufferings by that time are in the past. And the cords that are cut asunder, verse 4, were any cords that bound Israel. Back in Psalm 2, and we won't turn over there, but Psalm 2 and verses 2 and 3, it says, the kings of the earth set themselves in array, and the prince of the earth set themselves against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, let us break their cords from us, and so forth. I'm paraphrasing. But the man of sin, and those who follow him, will want to throw off any cords of God, and we can understand that to be anything that reminds man of God, or man's obligation to God, man's duty to God, the revelation of God by Jesus Christ. And that's why he's called the man of sin. We're going to throw off every vestige of biblical virtue, biblical morality. If everybody takes the mark of the beast and vows their allegiance to the man of sin, then and if as we see the events unfolding, are accurate, a chip in your hand or a chip in your forehead, by which the man of sin can follow and track every person on the earth, if that develops as we see it developing, and it's as we tend to interpret it, if that's exactly what will happen, then why should he care what you do with the rest of your time? You've already sworn your allegiance and loyalty to him, Satan in human form. But God will cast off some cords of his own one day. Any resolution by the UN or the US or the European Union that sought to restrict Israel or limit Israel or restrict her ability to defend herself or restrict her ability to expand her territory and no more settlements here, no more settlements there, to silence her from reminding the world of her own history, the history of the Nazis, the history of the Roman Catholic Church, the present history and conditions under Islam that they deal with every day. Anytime the Jew speaks up, the anti-Semites want to silence the Jew. Any resolution that the UN may pass to restrict Israel's ability or their liberty and freedom to protect herself by this means or that means, all of those things will be cast off by Jesus Christ. All those cords will be cut asunder. When someone was cut asunder or sawn asunder in the Scriptures, they'd tie somebody up and they'd slide their body into a hollow log. And then they would go ahead and they'd cut that log into two pieces. That's what it meant to be cut asunder. And to have those kinds of limitations, limiting the Jew, limiting the state of Israel, limiting the movement of the Jew, those things will all be things of the past. And Israel won't have to worry about that in the future. But then, in our psalm, the psalmist tends to get things out of order. We've talked about that before. And he goes back to Daniel's 70th week, the tribulation here in verses 5 and 6. And he did the same thing back in Psalm 126, verses 3 and 4. The Lord hath done great things for us, whereof we are glad. That's millennium. And then turn again our captivity, O Lord, as the streams in the south. That's tribulation. So he gets them in a different order, but who are we to question how God wrote his book? And then verses 5 and 6 are also what are called imprecatory psalms. That is, Psalm 109 is also like, it's a prayer invoking God's judgment, invoking God's curses and God's wrath upon his enemies. And that's how verses 5 and 6 are to be understood in this psalm also. And then the grass upon the housetops, mentioned in verse 6. You think about a rooftop, like the ones in ancient cultures, or a flat roof like the Jews would have, made out of mud, and usually straw and a few boards underneath, and then laid on top with mud, and that mud would harden and sufficient for someone to walk on. But usually you had a little wall, safety wall around the edge called a parapet, so you wouldn't fall off, or to keep you from falling off. And so you get grass beginning to grow on the rooftop, and the clay or the dirt that is accumulated on the roof, but it can't grow because there's no depth for roots. And so it can't really grow, it has no depth. And the mower, verse 7, he won't waste his time with it, since there's not enough to make a sheaf, to gather up a bundle, to make it worth his effort. And therefore, nobody will say, the blessing of the Lord be upon you, verse 8, since there's not enough there to harvest. The grass is withered on the rooftop. And these are the judgments brought to those, he says in verse 5, let them all be confounded and turned back that hate Zion. Well, I sure wouldn't want to be an anti-Semite when the Lord Jesus comes back and begins to rule the world from the city of Jerusalem and establishes the Jews back in their own homeland, kicks out all the Arabs and the Muslims, and anybody else that won't give him due honor as the king of the world. I'd sure hate to be somebody who's been on the wrong side of history when that time comes. Now, it's hard to imagine. I was talking with my son the other day about this. The two most anti-Semitic religions in the world have been the Roman Catholic Church and Islam. Both of those religions, now the Catholic Church tries to hide it, but they don't really do a good job. The Pope always wants to play nice with the Muslims over there in Israel. And the Arabs, they don't hide anything. But the two most anti-Semitic religions historically have been Roman Catholicism and Islam. Each one of those religions has about 1 billion followers, give or take, in the world right now. And the Catholic Church, they believe that the Pope takes the place of Jesus Christ on the earth. Since Jesus ascended into heaven, and he's not visibly on the earth anymore right now, he left the Pope in charge of men's spiritual needs. So he is the final authority in religious matters as far as Roman Catholicism is concerned. He's called the vicar, or the representative of Jesus Christ. He's a false Christ. The Lord Jesus Christ doesn't need any helpers among men to be his authority, since he's not on the earth like he once was. He's given us a Bible. This is my Pope right here. This is the Pope of every Bible believer. I don't need a man in a funny costume to be my Pope. And so Roman Catholic Church follows a false Christ. And Muslims already worship a false prophet, Muhammad. And both of those religions have been historically very anti-Semitic. And the Muslims, like I say, Muslims make no bones about that. Adolf Hitler was a devout Roman Catholic and never excommunicated from the church, nor were any of his generals who were also Catholics in the Third Reich. And so it seems to me very apparent that Roman Catholicism and Islam will one day eventually form an alliance together, one providing the man of sin, the other providing the false prophet. I don't know how the details will all be hammered out, because I'm not going to be here at that time. Thank the Lord. But it sure seems clear to me that they're suited for each other. And the worst days of the Jew being persecuted are yet to come in the near future. But those that hate Zion are sure going to be in for a rude awakening. Yes. Now, it's hard to imagine that in any of those people who take the mark of the beast, which is promoted by both of their leaders, very few of them will be remaining. But there may be some people, for any reason, who refuse to take the mark of the beast, refuse to worship the man of sin, and they survive to the end of the tribulation. They go into the millennium, still alive in their bodies. They weren't destroyed. And it's those people from all over the world the Lord Jesus Christ will call to give account and see how they treated the Jew during the tribulation, how they befriended or didn't befriend the Jew during his worst time of trouble. Well, that's enough for Psalm 129.